Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, Writing About Your Hereditary Cancer Journey with award-winning memoirists Mary Ladd and Grace Talusan. This is our second webinar of Force's Film Book Webinar Series. Thank you so much for joining us. Force is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of individuals and families facing hereditary cancers. No matter your hereditary cancer genetic mutation or diagnosis, Force and our trained volunteers are available to help. Visit our website for expert-reviewed information and access to our support pages and programs, including virtual Zoom meetings, our peer navigation matching program, and our online message boards. My name is Elise Boucher. I am a Force research advocate, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Tonight, we have the distinct honor of diving into two groundbreaking memoirs, the Wig Diaries and the Body Papers, that chronicle Mary and Grace's journeys through hereditary cancer. We will have the opportunity to hear excerpts from their books, learn about their writing processes, the challenges they faced documenting their stories, and how they overcame them to produce works that make us laugh, cry, feel seen, give us hope, and move us to action. After we hear from both Mary and Grace tonight, we will have a Q&A session to address many of the questions you have submitted for this event. I would like to introduce our first speaker for the evening. Mary Ladd is the author of The Wig Diaries, the irreverent cancer book illustrated by cartoonist Don Asmussen. The Wig Diaries has been featured in Lit Hub and W Magazine, and Mary's writings appear in the best-selling 642 Things to Write About book series and in Lit Start's Little Books of Writing Prompts. She has been featured in Playboy, Time Magazine's Extra Crispy, and the San Francisco Chronicle. You may have seen her on stage at the Community of Writers at Squaw Valley, Breast Cancer Action, Bay Area Young Survivors, and Litquake. She additionally is an esteemed member of the Writers Grotto and collaborated with Anthony Bourdain on his Bay Area episodes of No Reservations. Mary, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Force, for letting me be a part of this, and to all of you for coming out tonight from the comfort of your home. I'm going to read from the book first, and it's a chapter called Naked Hot Springs Retreat. And let's dive on in. The dome has a path leading to the all-gender locker room, where two women don bikini bottoms, yet go without tops or towels. Everyone else is completely nude. I rush a bit. I'm a newbie. I take off my cotton dress and my underwear, roll them up, and place in a wooden cubby. In a move straight out of my nervous junior high days, I quickly drape a towel over my trunk so that my vagina and breasts are covered. Mean girls pop up everywhere, right? Better to be on guard at all times. I walk out and select a deck lounge chair at the end of the row. I'd rather have nature to my right and just one human to my left, as I get around to the business of lying around in increasing modes of undress. I'm naked under a soft gray towel. I peek out from giant pink sunglasses to see what the male to female ratio is, roughly 50-50. Sunglasses and a big floppy hat are musts, mainly because they enhance my ability to look at others and see if anyone is looking at me. These hot springs couldn't cure my vanity. Without the sunglasses, I avert my gaze and look only at faces that are within a 5-foot radius. My shoulder and legs are fully exposed. I keep rearranging my tote bag in overly busy fashion. Maybe I enjoy this new vacation setup, but I'm still not ready to bare more skin. It's not shyness so much as mentally amping myself up to realize I'm just a body here, not more or less, just another paying customer seeking zen. I have zero emotional ties to the 15 folks lying around, and that helps me. I don't really want to be at the hot springs with friends, especially male friends. Letting male friends see me nude would inject a too hot dose of vulnerability into my brain. I sometimes feel confused about the guilt and strict mores of my religious upbringing. And I'd also think, I know now what Steve's dick looks like to myself if they were around. I see that people are having soft conversations. One couple is discussing some ongoing family saga. And it's an odd relief to scope out all the butts, legs, arms, penises, vaginas, and yes, breasts in my sightline. It helps me understand shapes and forms are diverse, but no one is like me without a nipple. So I give myself the most body scars prize. I'm happy to see the breasts and bodies aren't thin. We don't look like movie stars, but I do want to see other surgical scars on other folks. My most body scars title makes me feel like I should explain my scars, become my usual chatty self. Sitting still and letting the world face my scars feels tough, but I need it. Natural pubes seem in vogue. That's refreshing. I home in on a woman. She's in her 70s, gray hair, up in a loose bun. I think of her as my unofficial elder and guide. We never speak. I imagine she's faced her own challenges and illnesses. I mimic the way she walks slowly. She has a soft smile. If she does it, I can too, right? She looks serene in her nudity, and I long for the peace that she has. I read a book, and I also pause to write things down. I'm exhausted from all the heat, sweating in a steamy wooden sauna, and then moving to the pool, where I float and bob on my back while my breasts point up and out of the water. The floating is freeing and serene. I feel buoyed by the water. Later, showering in a private stall, I can smile in the same way as the senior bunned woman. There's a thin flowered curtain. That's all that separates me from two new young women who greet me by openly smiling and chatting about the towel hamper. There's a hardy man with his back to us, using the lockers. It's a novelty being so close to strangers who are naked. It stirs curiosity and desire. Slowly lathering, I gaze out the window at a sunny field. I wonder if folks ever pleasure themselves in these showers. This is a legit question. There's signage everywhere forbidding sexual activity of any sort, while cheekily pointing out that rooms are available for just that. I head back to my spot. I'm still shielding myself from imagined glances. I lay a towel down on the wooden deck, and it feels warm. Maybe now I can bravely turn over on my back, let my breasts hang out freely. As I slowly do this, my face feels warm, semi-embarrassed, sort of like how I feel when I first speak in front of a group in public. Squinting through those sunglasses, I realize that no one is looking at me. It's safe to lay my head back to let the sun shine on my skin, scars and all. So that's that, the naked stuff. Why me is a question that many of us may be tortured by. So I was a freelance blogger and food writer, and I did help Anthony Bourdain with his projects. I was used to writing about meat dresses, food trends, and chefs. I was diagnosed at age 39 with aggressive triple-negative breast cancer, and I soon found out that I carry the BRCA1 gene mutation. Most writers are cannibals, or at least I am. So I started writing about my new upside-down world right away. It seemed crazy to get my diagnosis on the phone from a doctor I would never meet. And outside the door, there were real estate prospectors tromping through my apartment. So I ran out and sobbed at a nearby parklet. So this is not what I expected, especially for my young son's first day back to school. Since food is still something that I love to obsess over, plan on having chocolate ice cream the day your life changes in a bazillion ways. My book, The Wig Diaries, has other great ideas on how to treat oneself or accept treats and love from others when you're sick. Things like hats and socks and robes. And if you want to knit me a prayer blanket, even though I don't pray anymore, to the God that I used to think about when I was little, go ahead and do it. As soon as I sent out my first "I have a disease" email, my friends and family started behaving very strangely and doing really weird things. They really wanted to help, but I'm sorry, I'm laughing at them. They gave me annoying advice, and they would tell me, drink more lemon water. You need to de-stress. Why don't you meditate? I'm bossy, so I told people, why don't you bring me expensive pastries or feed my family when they wanted to help? I also took a ton of notes while I was getting my blood drawn 69 times and having all those surgeries, infections, and follow-up visits. The stories I emailed out to my community let me take control and share what I wanted to instead of answering the same lame, annoying questions over and over. One friend said she was startled that chemo, for an example, seemed like a bizarro party, as told by yours truly. And I was also doing things like singing a song called "Dildos Are Forever" to the surgery team before I passed out under anesthesia. And I'm sure I was creating a hostile work environment. I also, back at home, had to dig turds out of my own body. So again, this is unexpected writing material. A few weeks in, a writer friend asked if I was going to do a book. And I've never done a book before. I've helped other people with their books, chefs and whatnot. She's a New York Times bestselling author, and I am not. So I decided to formally join a place called the Writer's Grotto with the goal of finishing the book. It's a space with over 100 writers, and I'm kind of wimpy, so I can copycat and ask questions there and get advice and feel less afraid with my writing. So I became the sassy, funny, damaged main character. I'm still a jerk, I'm not a superhero just because I have cancer or the BRCA1 gene mutation. I named my favorite blonde wig Andy Warhol, and I used wigs and fashion to help combat loneliness and sorrows. And I railed against a lot of the hopes and prayers that I received. And there's also the real American expectation that I should always just tell folks, I'm fine, or okay, or I'm good, even when I'm not. I was voted class clown in junior high, and I always got in trouble when I was little for talking way too much, and I was told that my mouth would get me in trouble. And so a lot of the stuff that made it in this book are things that probably would get me in trouble, and some people don't want to hear them, or they feel uncomfortable. But this was the first time in my writing that I could be awkward and funny and vulnerable and let the world hear my inside voice, which is sarcastic some of the time. Learning I have the BRCA1 gene mutation was an important piece of info, and it helped me understand why I had cancer. And yet I felt overly responsible. I got a hold of my cousins, my aunts and uncles, and I didn't want them to tell me how wonderful I was or what a warrior I was, but I really wanted to manage what they were going to do with the info that I'd shared, or if they were going to do anything with that info. And I don't have time or money for therapy, but the process of writing these things down and getting them out of my crazy brain was very, very therapeutic. And I'm over being embarrassed about things like diarrhea and constipation in the same hour. Happens all the time. Fatigue, depression, memory loss, which I still have, dried up eyes. Apparently I have the eyes of an 83-year-old. I learned that when I was 41. That made me burst into tears, not being able to see so well. And then there's the after effects, withered sexuality, and a brutalized body with a ton of scars. The illustrator who you see, those are the slides, his name is Don Asmussen, and his work, he appears in the San Francisco Chronicle as well as other newspapers throughout the country. And the Chronicle is where I first started doing food writing a long time ago. And it's also where I met my husband, Oscar. When I first started sending out these emails, Don did not send me any hearts and prayers. Instead, he was making fun of me when I was losing my hair, and his emails were really refreshing. And he also shared that he had lost his hair and what it was like when he had cancer and was going through it. So I decided to be cool. Why don't we partner together? Again, I'm a wimp, so I'd rather be accountable and work with someone who I respect and have fun with. So we would have our meetings in a very glamorous mall food court, but it was an anonymous place where we could gossip about our family and the way people act when they encounter sickies like us, as well as death. You know, it's this stigma that people want to run away from. Also, Dawn has a ton of fans, and so I thought, let me partner with you so that your fans will want to read the book. I started sending the book out to publishers and agents, and it was a tough sell. I was told a lot that this isn't the book for me, or you're too young for me to take this book on. And what Dawn and I realized, maybe we didn't send it to the right publishers or agents, but if someone has not experienced, if they don't have the BRCA gene mutation, or they don't have cancer, or they don't know anyone that has, which seems unlikely, they really don't want to look at their own life and realize, death is a part of life. So it was a struggle. I kept writing. I contributed to a breast cancer specific anthology and then other books from the Writer's Grotto. And I had a double mastectomy. They cut my breasts off and made new ones with my belly fat. When I was diagnosed, I had long hair, and I'd been eating like amazing tasting menu food for a long time. So when they cut that belly fat off and turned it into my breasts, I figured, okay, I'll be a plastic surgery person. The hysterectomy, when that happened, I was surprised because that was an easier surgery. But emotionally, I paused whenever I would see someone who looked like an extremely happy grandmother with a grandbaby. And so it's not that I necessarily wanted another child. I have one. He still draws me with long hair. He's traditional like that. But having a hysterectomy and also instant menopause, it caused, I felt powerless yet again. And I don't like being powerless. So I entered writing contests. I sold some of my essays, and some readers would respond, "Oh, that's really graphic. That's very gross." But then they would email me their own crazy medical tale or something that had happened to their body or in their family. So I figured this is hitting a nerve in a good way. And one of my editors said, "I'm really sorry you have cancer and are going through so much," after she read one of my updates. "But I really enjoy your sense of humor and the writing that has come out of it. I wish it had come out before, but writing about chefs, it's not like I could make fun of them, or it wasn't really appropriate earlier." And the book opens with a list of questions. It's a great primer. The book itself you can keep in the bathroom because it's short chapters, and you can start at the end or you can start in the middle. But this list of questions is meant for anyone that scolds me and tells me that I have to eat organic and expensive ingredients, without realizing that when I'm sick, a lot of times people would just leave the room or go quiet and go really awkward when I kind of hobble walk in. There's also an open letter to Angelina Jolie, and I thank her for being so public with her family's genetic history. And without her, I wouldn't have gone to the doctor for a second opinion. Then when we get to the diagnosis part, there's details on famous folks who have breast cancer. I really like knowing who's in the club, how are they doing, are they stage 4, how are they managing with this experience. The book also serves up taboos, oozing wounds. I had the hots for my surgeon. He's a very handsome person, and I realized later that I was not the only one who has a crush on him. But we're both married, but it was clearly me, horny, yet unable to do anything about it sex-wise, which is a bummer back at home. And I had a serious case of transference. Detailing this medical crush and also the very real medical money concerns, money, that came up with a wider audience, it didn't make my husband happy. And, he's an editor, he's written stuff as well, but he thought no, we're fine. Please, keep these things private. So I took him off my email list so he wouldn't have to read it anymore. He thought we were okay, but I was really panicked and afraid and kind of a mess a lot of the time. But I also wrote about how sad and uncomfortable and unsettling it is to be at the hospital. I get woken up every 47 seconds. Someone wants to poke or prod or draw my blood. He had a habit of waking me up in the hospital, and there's a very special section on that, on what I wanted to do in response. I wouldn't really stab him in the eye, but I wanted to because I was exhausted and had just come out of surgery a day before. So I wonder also, wouldn't it be great if we could hold up a sign that says, "Be nice to me," right? And sometimes my anger seeps into my writing in this book. And there's a published letter that I wrote to a certain congressman who is weighing in the media on who in our country deserves medical care. And he made it sound like when people get sick, that it's their fault, that they're a bad person. And writing that piece and then publishing it and seeing how many folks had read it was very freeing for me. And I heard from other people who have other medical issues, and they said, "Thank you for speaking that truth. It helps me. I have asthma. I'm a woman. I've, all of the issues. I have mental illness." It's just very frustrating when someone's trying to make decisions on our behalf that seem to not really care about us as humans and individuals. I searched for an endpoint, and there doesn't seem to be one. Even though I'm out of treatment, I have to get blood work still done and monitored and all that. But there isn't an endpoint. There's not a beautiful building that I can stroll into and just hang out. And I have to kind of take care on my own and patch it together with support groups. With my various support networks, I appreciate it because we don't just say, "You'll be fine." Instead, there's a nod of recognition. I can see it in someone's eyes that they can relate, or they've experienced a similar concern or issue, or just know what it's like. So we tell the truth to each other and we listen. I started contributing to a magazine. It's called Wildfire, and they do events like this where you can hear people read their work. And it's geared towards young women who have experienced breast cancer. Many of the contributors have BRCA gene mutations. I love writing that lacks platitudes and that tests my tiny levels of patience. I'm going to end right there, and thank you so much for letting me read.
Thank you so much, Mary. Obviously, your humor and writing is so deeply real, and it really does make us all feel a little less alone. So thank you so much for sharing your life and your work with us.
Thanks.
And we'll be bringing Mary back for questions at the end, so don't worry, this isn't the last time you'll see her this webinar. But next, I would like to introduce Grace Talusan, whose first book, The Body Papers, is a New York Times editor's choice selection, a must-read for the Massachusetts Book Awards, a forward Indies finalist, and a winner of the Restless Books Prize for New Immigrant Writing. She was born in the Philippines and raised in New England. She graduated from Tufts University and the MFA program in writing at UC Irvine. She is the recipient of the U.S. Fulbright Fellowship to the Philippines and an Artist Fellowship Award from the Massachusetts Cultural Council. She taught writing for many years at Tufts University and Grub Street, and currently, Grace is the Fannie Hurst Writer in Residence at Brandeis University. The floor is yours, Grace.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with you tonight at Force. I want to thank Sue Friedman and Barbara Pfeiffer, and of course the team tonight, Elise and Sandy. And it's really an honor to read with you, Mary, and to hear your work and your story behind your, your really moving but also funny book. So thank you. So I'm going to read a little bit from my memoir called The Body Papers. The storyline about my experiences with hereditary cancer is just one story that I tell. There's other stories that I tell in this book, but I'll focus on reading from that story since this is about hereditary cancer and our writing journeys around that. So I'll start by reading. So this is a photo of my father and my paternal grandmother. My father passed down the faulty gene through his mother, Inang. My grandmother was a strong and healthy woman, a survivor. My Aunt Abigail tells a story about how Inang, visibly pregnant, was at the market with her one day during World War II when Japanese soldiers showed up looking for the local men. In the commotion and fear, my grandmother Inang slid under a table and hid Abigail under her dress between her legs. Ms. Chan, my genetic counselor, happened to work in the same medical complex as the hospital room where my sister Tessie was recovering from a bilateral mastectomy. She had endured chemo, radiation, and now surgery. I promised my sister Tessie that I would visit her after my appointment with the genetic counselor. Good luck, she said weakly. Her bare head was covered with a cap, her skin gray. She looked almost dead. I have a really good feeling, I told her. No worries. I could tell from the way my genetic counselor's voice sounded on the phone that my results were going to be negative. In other words, positive, something to celebrate. I sat at the small table with Ms. Chan, smiling. My husband Alonzo was next to me, smiling too. I told him that morning that he didn't need to come with me and miss work. I was going to get good news. In my mind, I had already endured enough bad things for one lifetime. The rest would be icing. Ms. Chan pushed a piece of paper at me. So here are your results, she said flatly. You're positive for the gene. I surprised myself by bursting into tears. I'm so sorry, she said. I hate this fucking gene. I returned to my sister's hospital room after I got the news. Tessie tried to smile at me, but instead grimaced in pain. I am just so happy, she said, that you don't have to go through what I've gone through. You can prevent this. Now, she says, I'm lucky. I don't have to live in fear that rogue cancer cells are hiding out in my bones or brain, waiting to show up one day to ruin my life. And this is a photo of my sisters with me. I'm the one in the childhood photo, I'm the one in the middle. And in the other photo of the three of us, I'm the one wearing black at the top of the stairs. But all three of my sisters and I share the BRCA mutation. This is from another part of the book where I write about my experience with mastectomy. So this is in the hospital already, right before I go in for surgery. I'm just going to put something in to relax you. You might feel dizzy, the doctor said. I nodded. The woman crouched, slid a syringe from her pocket, and pushed the liquid into my hand. A moment later, I woke up shivering cold and desperate to pee. My voice was so soft it didn't reach the nurses working around me. I was afraid I might wet the bed. I just need the toilet one more time before surgery, I said. You're all done, the nurse said. You did great. We're going to take you up to your room in just a minute. But when will I have the surgery? I asked. And then I looked down at my chest and saw the bloody drains pinned to my gown and the white of the surgical bra strapped around me. I tried to sit up, but I was too sore. My body was a pain cage. In that moment, I lost my fear of death. About 6 hours had gone by in a blink of an eye. It was that easy to be and not to be. And this is a picture of me. I'm in black, and that's actually my younger sister after her mastectomy. And I wanted to read this because it has to do with FORCE, which is such a special organization to me. They totally changed my life, and I really appreciate everything that FORCE has done for me and our community. A few years ago, I attended a FORCE conference with Anne and my cousin Marie, who both have the BRCA1 mutation and were considering preventive mastectomies, and dragged them to an evening event where women were invited to show each other their post-operative chest and talk about their recovery processes in a more relaxed atmosphere. At some point, after some wine, I surprised myself by taking off my shirt at the crowded party. No one would ever mistake what I have now for what I had before the mastectomy, but I wasn't ashamed to show the reality of my body. I did not hide the failed nipples that my plastic surgeon tried to make in her office one afternoon, tattooing a dark circle over my mastectomy scar, then slicing the skin and stitching the edges into a burgundy top hat. I was impressed with her technique. She made them pretty. I didn't know I cared about having nipples until I saw myself in the doctor's mirror. Something inside me unclenched. From a distance, I almost looked like myself again. Unfortunately, the nipples didn't take, and now there were brown smudges where the top half had been, but I wasn't ashamed. I allowed the curious women to feel the size and weight of my breast, to trace where the implant was attached to muscle. It's been several years since my surgery, and I hardly ever think about my lost breasts anymore. I'm grateful for my breast mounds, a fair trade for peace of mind and the opportunity to escape breast cancer. Every now and then, my father will bring up my mastectomy. Perhaps he feels guilty for being the one who passed on the genetic mutation. Some of our relatives have died too young from cancer. You did the right thing, he always says. I know it was hard, but you are still alive. And this is a photo of me with my father as a child within one of the first years that we were in the United States. I immigrated from the Philippines. And this is a more recent photo of my father and I. So thank you. That was the reading portion of my remarks, and thought I'd talk a little bit about the writing process and what writing about hereditary breast and ovarian cancer gene mutation meant to me. And I did, so when this happened to me, I did a lot of research. I'm a writer, so one of the things I do to comfort myself is read and write. And I learned from doing some historical research that there was a time in our society when we didn't talk about cancer, when it was considered something to whisper about. And I'm really grateful that I learned about my genetic mutation at a time when people were talking about it and women were more open, and there was a lot more information, including all the people on the bulletin boards at FORCE who were so good about answering questions and telling their own stories. That's a kind of telling your, like some people think, oh, I wouldn't be able to write a memoir, write an essay to publish it. But I mean, I think the kind of writing that people did on the bulletin boards, and maybe some people talk on the phone with peers, or they write each other emails, or they write for the newsletter, like all of these things are a way of expressing yourself and writing about your story and your particular experience with this condition or these news and the tests and all the things that you have to go through. And it's very impactful to do that, whether you're doing it for an audience that buys your book or you're really just telling one person or a group of people who need a question answered. So I think it's very important that we, if we're comfortable, we try to share our stories and we don't keep these silent. A question that I had was about my history with the BRCA gene mutation. We knew what happened. We knew that my grandmother had the mutation from a process of elimination. She had died by the time that cancer came up in some of my cousins. And so this is an excerpt from the book that I won't read it, but it's from the book, and it tells the story about what happened in my family. But basically, we found that my cousins were coming out with breast cancer, and it was puzzling. And so we were lucky enough they were in the United States, and they were lucky enough to get tested. And then when my sister was diagnosed with breast cancer, she got tested, and then I got tested, and then I made sure to tell my family, because that was part of the protocol, to tell people. And so, I was really lucky. I mean, I'm in the first generation of people in my family who have information about hereditary cancer. And some people may feel, I know I felt this way sometimes. I felt like it was a burden, but I can tell you from about 10 years out or so of knowing this information and doing something about the information, that I feel incredibly lucky. It was a burden, and it was burdensome at times, but I feel really glad that I have this information because I was able to do something about it. And I think doing something about it for me was better than having to react to the disease and what would happen if the disease had progressed and we had to treat it, which is what happened with my sister and with some of my cousins who had disease progressions that were a lot further along. So I felt fortunate that I didn't have to go through that. And I felt the weight of responsibility. I felt like, okay, if I've been given this information, what would be the responsible thing to do? And so I tried to do that, as painful as it was. I think there was another question in the slides. I'm not sure, but if there wasn't, it's okay. So I just have a couple more minutes, and I think I'll just talk a little bit about why I think it was so important for me to say something about and talk publicly and even publish this book about my experience. It's not something that I feel like I'm a writer. I tend to be introverted. I tend to be really shy. I'm able to do these speaking engagements because I think it's really important for me to break out of my comfort zone. And if I have the privilege, if I've had the privilege to write and publish this book, I think I have this other responsibility to be the face of the book and go out and speak to people. But it's not necessarily something that is something I'm comfortable with. And I think about that with people, people talking about their experiences with hereditary cancer. And, being able to share information, I think, is incredibly important because we can learn from each other. And whether you write the story or tell it at like a storytelling event or tell it at family dinner with your relatives who may also be impacted by this, I think it's really important for us to tell our stories and show people that it's something that you can go through, that it's not devastating, that it's something that you can not only survive with, but thrive. And when I ever went to forced conferences or other events where I met other folks who were in different parts of their journey with the testing and with surgeries or with chemo prevention, it was incredibly important for me to meet them and to see that they had gone through these experiences that I had yet to go through. And they told me their stories, and hearing them tell their stories and having them stand in front of me and to see that they had gone through it and come through it, whole and thriving, it really made a difference. So I was incredibly grateful for that. And I know some of you may be interested in telling your stories for more public purposes, maybe for trying to publish some essays or write about this experience in a fictional form, or maybe distribute it to family, or even write a book. And I'm hoping in the questions and answers that Mary and I will address some of your interests and curiosities and concerns with that, because I know that there is a body of work around other people who've written about their experiences with hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, but I think there's room for a diversity of experiences and to hear from as many people in our community as possible. So I really encourage you to tell your story and to write it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Grace, for sharing so deeply about your life and process. Your work and dedication to this community is so very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So at this time, as I promised, we are bringing Mary back to join Grace to answer some of the questions that you have all submitted. So Mary, this first question is for you. Why did you write a book about your experiences with the BRCA gene mutation?
I covered it in the book because I didn't even know how to say the word BRCA. So, and a lot of people I encountered didn't as well. So there's that. You don't hear it on TV or in book, like a lot of the newspaper. So I also wanted to plant seeds of information. Because the middle of the night for me can be scary earlier in the process. And I know what it's like to be afraid and unsure. And so I wanted to offer up, there is a way through it. Here, there is support. You can find your community, and it'll be messy and all of that, but you can get through it. So that people, and I also had one of my readers say, I had no idea about BRCA, the gene mutation, and other parts of the story. And if they have no idea, then how will they know about it if it comes up for them or someone they know?
Thank you. And so Grace, this next question is for you. Any words of advice to someone who is desperately wanting to write a memoir, but is emotionally overwhelmed by the writing process?
Yes, I think that starting really small is important. We don't want to be overwhelmed. I think it can be difficult to write if we're overwhelmed. So I think taking the smallest possible bit of writing the memoir or anything that you want to write is the way to go, and having benchmarks that you can hit that are small. And so one practical way to do it is with a timer, and to say like, okay, I'm going to write about this thing for 5 minutes, and that's it. And then when the timer's done, like that's it. You then go back to it another day or at another session. Another way that might be helpful is you write with a buddy. And I know that we're in pandemic times, and what I do is I do like this. I have like a Zoom call or a video call almost every day with a friend, and we write together. And we do that so that I don't feel alone. So anything that you can do to feel like you're not alone and that you're not going to be overwhelmed because you're going to take small pieces of it at a time is a way to not feel overwhelmed.
Great. And I'm going to actually piggyback off of what you just said and ask something similar to you, Mary, in that once you are started, can you speak a little bit to the type of environment that you put yourself in? Are you writing in a group? Are you using a writing coach? How do you personally go through the process of writing the book in terms of guidance, support, and accountability?
For accountability, I tried to get assignments because I didn't know this would be a book at first, and there are months and milestones for various things, and editors really want to hear from folks like us what our experiences are, so I would try and get in that way. I also, through the Writer's Grotto, it is an office, but a lot of times I wasn't physically well enough to go in, but I could make it in for an essay group. And that was a place for accountability, but it was also a place for validation of, well, this is your story. Why don't you restructure it this way? I didn't have a writing coach, but I did have enough people on the email list getting an email from me. So if there were pauses, it wasn't like it happened very quickly, but they kept asking, when is the book coming out? How is the book coming along? And so I had to keep going, and I had to also stop worrying that it'll be perfect and just have it. It's already there. So I hired a woman who's an editor. She edits journals and things like that, and just had her look it over. And she had been sort of a cheerleader all along. So she's like, keep this, and then you don't need to keep going. Let's just make it happen.
Excellent. And so Grace, this next one is for you. You had spoken a little bit about how you're an introvert and observer and you're internalizing a lot of things. So as you were going through your journey, how did someone else's stories about the BRCA gene mutation or other issues help you that you encountered along the way?
Other people's stories were really important for me. And I mean, for example, someone in our community, Joanna Rudnick, who did In the Family, that was really important. There were stories right before, about 2 months before I had the mastectomy, the New York Times did a front page piece on Deborah Lindner, who's also a part of the forced community. And, you know, that was very important for me too, because I knew, I mean, I had been participating in the community, and so it was normalized, the things that we were talking about, but people around me, sometimes they were critical, frankly, and judgmental. Like, why would I go get a preventive mastectomy? But to have people, to have like Joanna's book, I mean, Joanna's film, and other people publishing and writing and being public, like you, Mary, you mentioned Angelina Jolie, she came after me in terms of her storytelling, but all of that is really important because then people weren't giving me a hard time. They were understanding like, oh, okay, that's actually the, you know, what the protocol, like that's what doctors and people are recommending. So I was really grateful for all the ways that people eased my burden by telling their stories.
Amazing. And that is what this community is all about, having a place to tell stories and share stories and empower each other. And so obviously you say that, you know, you're fielding all of these hard questions, you're trying to cover all of these really emotionally draining topics. Mary, for someone like you who, you know, voted your class clown, loves to inject humor, we have people asking, you know, my story is written with facts and little emotion and humor. It's already long, and adding those will make it longer. How do you divide into chapters, adding emotion and humor and brightness?
Well, there's a start and an end. That could be one way to do the chapters, you know, an endpoint, a natural endpoint. And if you're wanting to add humor and emotions, perhaps think of someone who is a funny person and take a portion of it and try and tell it in the way that this person would tell it. For me, a lot of times the humor is where there's this tension of, well, that doesn't feel normal to me, or that's a surprise. And so a lot of times readers are surprised as well. So look at it in that way. And then you might want to try writing prompts. I've used those for my writing because it forces me to try different things and try different voices and formats. And you can do it for 30 minutes, you know, in little chunks. So it's doable. It might not necessarily make it longer if you add those things.
And so for you, you're talking about personal experiences. This next question is actually, I'm going to ask you both. So when you're having to tackle writing about the sometimes unpleasant experiences you have with those who you love and care about, and you want to be honest and respectful, how do you go about conveying those experiences without hurting anybody's feelings or you know, embarrassing anybody in your circle? And I'll ask first, Grace.
Right. So for me to do any writing, especially about like what you're referencing here, unpleasant experiences, I need to have privacy in my head. Like I can't, if I'm wondering how, you know, my mother or somebody is going to feel about my writing, I'm not going to write it. So I need the utmost privacy in my head. And I just think like, no one's going to read this. I'm just writing it to put it down. And then I go from there, and then I start to develop it. Then I might make a decision about whether I'm going to publish this or not, or even share it with my writing group. And I'll make decisions along the way. And, you know, I think if you approach your writing in a way with the right kind of attitude, I guess, which is, I wasn't trying to get revenge on anybody. I wasn't trying to express my anger or contempt for anybody through my writing. I was trying to understand. And if my narrator, or if me on the page really is that person trying to understand something, then even if it's unpleasant or complicated or somebody doesn't look great, then maybe they'll understand. And that said, they might not. Like, you can't control how people are going to feel about your writing. Like, you might be really surprised that people are mad about something or hurt, about something that you didn't expect they would be. But I think if you try to approach your writing in a really honest way with the right sorts of intentions, you'll get there. And then I think it's good to have like people you trust read it. I wouldn't show my family my work. I mean, I have a writing group that I would show them because I want my writing group to tell me about craft issues and other things. I don't want them to say, please don't publish this because so-and-so is gonna be mad. But you know, that's my approach.
For me, I removed people from the mailing list who I didn't want them to read it because some of the folks reading it in my family are a lot more traditional than I am. And so I'll be honest, with my mom, it's not that I would have put her in the book necessarily, but there is some stuff that happened that I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't even finish the book until she had passed away. And I think that it was that some of the stuff I wrote, she wasn't happy hearing it or reading about it. So there's that. And then with my husband, we worked through it, and I just said, but you don't understand how many people are so people would run into him and they'd say, wow, that was so powerful what Mary's saying. And so it wasn't necessarily the money stuff or the me having the hots for my doctor, but once he realized how much it was helping people in the community, it was sort of like gonna just go with it. And the support I received ahead of time was from other people at the Writers Grotto who continued to say, this is your story, keep going. And then for other people, there are some mentions. I just didn't name some folks, like the cancer deniers. I had some of those. They denied that I had it. That was lovely. And then someone who he came to my birthday party because I think he thought I was going to die, and he was hugging me for a really long time. So I just didn't call those folks out because I felt like everyone's trying to do their best. I mess it up sometimes too. I step in it. And so I want people to at least keep trying to talk about it or acknowledge the health issue in the room, so to speak.
I think that all makes so much sense and resonates with everyone who's trying to write or chronicle their experiences. And to your point, there's a lot that has to do with writing that's about timing. So people want to know, did you write a lot during the journey? Did you start writing afterwards? We're not even just talking about publishing. We're talking about actual, pen to paper or, on your laptop. When are you putting these words onto the page?
So Mary, I'm thinking about how your process was more immediate than mine. I mean, you were sending emails out, I'm assuming, or you're sending your newsletter out, probably close to when you finished writing it, writing that thought or something. And so I'm thinking about that and how also you get immediate feedback too. People could write to you 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, and so anyways, I just think that's there's something I can, if I imagine doing that, I think how I think I would have liked that too. There's something satisfying about having a response, and feeling heard rather than waiting. For me, I think it was there's years in between me writing something and someone reading it. So anyways, but the question that was posed, I think that for me, writing is a way that I cope psychologically. So I always have a tiny notebook, or now with my phone, I can write things in my phone. It's my way of coping. And I've been with people who do it, who process the world by talking. I've been with folks who want to talk the whole thing through. They're oh, look at that person, and what do you think about this? And they're talking it out, these things that I would just write in a notebook when I'm having an experience. But I think it's just different approaches. But I always am taking notes. I don't necessarily look at my notes when I go to write a piece, but I think the act of making notes helps cement it in my brain so that when it comes time for me to sit down and work on a piece or an essay or something, there's already been some rehearsal or practice there because I've written it in a note. already?
I was taking notes throughout because I couldn't hear what the doctors were saying. And I see this when my mom was sick as well. My dad's like, she's going to recover. I was like, that's not what I heard at the meeting. My brain wasn't processing what was being said to me sometimes. And also, I was really tired, so I wasn't remembering things very well. So I was always taking notes. And if I can't sleep at night, I have this crazy, scary drawer that has scrap paper, and I'll just take that out and write in that. And then I have journals in different places. I also have a document on my in my laptop, and I'll just type in that. And that's just definitely doesn't all make it into an article or a or the book. But I was keeping track the whole time. And then I would also write notes on tests that I would get or things the doctor would say, just so I could remember the other patients that were there, the guy talking meanly to his mom in the waiting room, I'm like, you should be banned. So yeah, it was just an ongoing thing and a practice that I just stick with to get it out of my head.
Yeah, and the way what you described, Mary, I think there's like the usefulness of the taking down of notes when you have a doctor's appointment, because you're right, like there's what we remember, and it's important information too. It's like what we remember and then what we actually wrote down, and sometimes there can be a disconnect there, which is probably why it's good to, if it's possible, have someone to go with you for these sorts of appointments, if it's possible. But what you were saying, Mary, also made me think that I think taking notes and observing is like it's an orientation, or it's like a distraction too. So, because I mean, sometimes it's boring, like waiting around for stuff, and you don't want to play another game of solitaire on your phone or whatever it is, check your email. So for me, it's a way of passing time, is like being observant and looking around, and your your insight, or like you're observing how people are talking to each other. Like, to me, that's interesting, whether I ever use it or not. It's interesting to pay attention to a moment and then write it down.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah.
And so now you have these notes, then it turns into your work. So once you have it, how do you approach a publisher about your book?
Do you want to go first, Mary? You were talking about this earlier.
Sure. I approached them, they reject me. I went to lunch with one. I was told, oh, we don't really do cancer books, and oh, you're not famous enough. It's a weird hybrid book. It's not a graphic novel. There's some photos, or there's some pictures, illustrations. And so we kept getting rejected. I'm sort of used to that with writing. You get rejected often. You should just expect that. But Dawn's cancer returns. So once I heard that, I was sort of ready to just let this project go and just keep working on other stuff. And a friend of mine, her name is Tamara Palmer, and she and I know each other from food writing. And she used Kickstarter every January. They do this Make 100, and it's you try and get 100 people to buy copies of your, for her, it was a magazine that she created about California food. And she said, well, why don't you just try that? Don't you think you have 100 people at least that read your emails? They'll buy it. Why don't you do a Kickstarter? And I didn't have the time to wait for a publisher to say yes. So I did a Kickstarter, and we actually got about what we might have gotten from a publisher. And then I was able to steal from my husband's roster of designer and then a printer. And so I self-published it, and now I know how to do that. And that's another crazy making experience. But I'm just glad, because it is in bookstores, and I was able to bring it to life and get into hospital bookstores and things like that.
Yeah, and I think if the goal is to have people read your work and for the book to exist, like a lot of what people call like legacy publishers, it doesn't matter. Like you can, like the tools of distribution and production are all possible for everyone. So I think that, yeah, so it's like thinking about what your goals are as writers. Like, do you want this book to exist? Do you want it to be available sooner rather than later? I think, self-publishing or something called hybrid publishing, places like She Writes does that. And they'll do the hiring and the production and all that stuff for you, so that you're not, trying to hire people individually to design and do all of that other stuff. those are possible, but I think it's good for folks to think about what their goals are. So for me, I heard the very same things that you heard, Mary, about not being famous enough to publish a book, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what does that even mean? So, I mean, but I entered my book into a contest that was looking for immigrant writers. Otherwise, I had been, heard no constantly. And I was really just thought, like, I'll publish, like, I'll self-publish, I don't care. But I did happen to win this contest, and Restless Books has been an amazing publisher and partner. But I think that, I think it's very hard, and think about your goals. Like, if it's for someone to read it, then there's ways to make that happen sooner rather than later.
Yep, absolutely.
Excellent. Well, a larger metaphor for life. Just keep trying out there. And you'll see everybody here on this screen. This is the purchasing information to buy the body papers and the wig diaries. If you haven't already read them or purchased them, they're incredibly moving. They'll make you laugh. They'll make you cry. And they'll make you take action in your life if you are on this path. Most of us in this room probably are in some regard. So for tonight, I would just like to thank you both so much, Mary and Grace, for sharing your life's work with us and for answering the many questions that were submitted. We are so lucky to have you in our Force family, and so grateful for your participation and honesty in your writing and in tonight's webinar. Thank you for all the tips that you've shared to help others write their own stories. Your stories have certainly helped us to manage our own hereditary cancer experiences and have made a great impact on our lives. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing all of you when we can be together in real life, at a conference. I will be there.
Yeah, that would be great.
Thank you.
And safe. Thank you.
Thank you, team.
And so for everybody else who's still here with us, if you enjoyed tonight's webinar, please register for our last webinar in this series. On National Survivor Day, which is September 30th, we will be presenting Beat Breast Cancer Like a Boss. It's going to be a panel discussion and book review with award-winning journalist and seasoned TV producer Ali Rogan, Grammy-nominated songwriter and former American Idol judge Cara Diaguardi, and Mary Powell, who serves as CEO of Green Mountain Power for over 2 decades. It's definitely a webinar that you don't want to miss, just like this one. So please continue to reach out to Force for your support and information needs. Know that you are not alone. Thank you so much for attending tonight, and good night, everybody.